is Lillian Gantsutis. I am on staff here at the Atlanta History Center. Today is Thursday, September the 25th, 2003. We are interviewing a World War II civilian, Mrs. Jane Steele. Jane, would you introduce yourself? Tell us your name, your birth date, and your place of birth.
I'm Jane Cox Steele. I was born 6/28/1920 in Eatonton, Georgia.
Okay, thank you.
Putnam County.
Putnam County. A few questions just sort of about your background. What were your parents' names?
Maddie Reed Hearn Cox and Charles Patterson Cox.
And when were they married? Do you remember what or where? Don't remember? That's okay.
I'm having to think a minute. When were they married?
Or where?
Well, they were married in Eatonton in the Methodist Church.
Okay.
And I don't know. My brother was born in 1912.
All right. Well, tell me about other members of your family. Tell me your siblings.
I had one brother, and he died 35 years ago.
What was his name?
Reed Hearn Cox.
Okay. And was he older or younger?
Yeah, older.
Older brother. How did you get your name? Do you know?
Jane, my great-grandmother's on my Cox and the Hearn and the Pennington. I got it from Penningtons and Hearn and Cox.
So Jane was a family name.
Very much.
And then Cox was a family name.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sorry, but Reed was your
Brother's name.
Reed was your brother's name, and that was also a family name.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What is your earliest childhood memory in Eatonton? Just tell me
I
a
guess
story.
my grandfather died when I was 3 years old. My father died when I was 3 years old, and he was sick for a long time, like 5 years, and I wasn't allowed to see him because he had tuberculosis. So my first memory, they brought him to see me before he died, and I was like, is she looking for you? They brought him, and they wouldn't even let me stay in the house with him. They brought him out in the yard, and I saw him. Mm-hmm. And then he died right after that. And the other thing I remember, my grandfather was a big Methodist. And since my father died, we lived with my grandparents in Eatonton. And I would walk. He would drive us to church, to the Methodist church, every Sunday morning to Sunday school and church. But then we would walk every Sunday night and every Wednesday night to prayer meeting. Mm-hmm. And I just remember that because I adored him.
Describe you lived with your grandparents. Describe the house that you grew up in.
Well, it was built in 1856 and by a very famous architect, and I can't think of his name, but It's an old house. It's still there now.
Mm-hmm.
And
what was
well,
was there 2 rooms, 4 rooms downstairs, big central hall?
No, it's all on one floor.
Uh-huh.
And I'm trying to think it has white columns.
Mm-hmm.
And it had, when I was growing up there, of course, we had no central heat or air conditioning. We had big open fireplaces in every room.
Mm-hmm.
And we had 5 acres of land, and we had a big garden and a peach orchard and a pecan orchard and a cow named Bessie Jane I don't know whether I was named for the cow, she was named for me. But who they loved the most, the meal, Bessie Jane. She was a very important part of the family.
Tell me something, you mentioned your grandfather and driving to church but then walking to the meetings. Tell me something about your grandmother.
Well, she died when I was about 11 years old. She was a Reed and very proud of her Reed connections. Mm-hmm. And she was very elegant, and just kept a wonderful house, and just everything had to be just exactly right. And she was just a wonderful person.
And tell me something.
And made a lot of my clothes and dressed me and all that.
Tell me something about your mother.
My mother, Well, went to Wesleyan, and she loved music, and she played the piano a lot. And her sisters all went to Wesleyan. And she loved me and my brother a lot. She never did work. She was fortunate. Well, the only thing I had, she had two brothers who were dentists, and she did work for one in Eatonton who was a dentist for a little while. She had a brother in Atlanta who was a dentist down on Whitehall Street, and he was a volunteer fireman back many, many, many years ago. And he had an office on Whitehall Street, and he lived over his office. And
What was that? What was your uncle's name?
Heron, W.D. Heron. William Dodge Heron, and the Dodge was for a Methodist preacher that my family loved. And then he had a place in Florida. He'd shut up his place on Whitehall Street and go to Florida and fish. He was very interesting.
Tell me sort of what you did for play as a child growing up in Eatonton.
We read books, and we had, I'm just trying to think, there was a servants' quarters in the back, another separate house, and there was one room that they just kind of made into a playhouse or something for us. And we had a book club, and all the girls in town my age we would meet and read books. And of course the kindergarten I went to, I walked right across the street. But we played paper dolls, and we had cats and dogs. And I don't remember having many dolls, but I played a lot of paper dolls and cats and dogs. And my grandfather had one of the first automobiles in Eatonton, and he believed in riding, and we just rode everywhere.
What was special about that?
Well, that was the entertainment. You said, what did we do?
you
We'd ride in the country, and we'd ride up to North Georgia, to the mountains, to Mount Airy, Georgia.
So long rides.
Short and long rides. He owned some farms out in the country he had tenant farmers, and we'd go out there every Sunday, and he'd close his office maybe early, and we'd go out and check on his farms. But I'll tell you something else. I started to tell, wait a minute. One thing we did all of my life when I was small, his family came from Queen Anne County, Maryland, somewhere in Maryland. They brought their slaves with them to Putnam County. My grandfather was William Howell Heron. And all of those slaves that they brought, he and his brother built them their own church, their own houses, and they had their own community. And we went every Sunday and visited with them and took them anything that they didn't work. It was their own little community. And they were very dear, and they were very well taken care of all of their lives.
Remember the name of the church?
Well, it was at Hearnville, so I don't know. I don't really know. But I'll always remember that.
Do you want to take a sip of your water?
Yeah. But I don't like for people to say that all slaves were mistreated, because in our family they were not. In fact, the Reed family, I always was told, because the Hearns and the Reeds and the Penningtons all related to. But anyway, I have been told, they even had doctors who looked after their slaves. They weren't all mistreated. A lot of them maybe were, but not all of them. But I've always been told that the Reed family had doctors that looked after their family and their slaves, and they were taken good care of. And I know that my grandparents did. And we would go there to church, as I said, thank you, that my grandparents built, my grandfather built for them, and we would hear them sing, and they were just very dear. Uncle, I can't remember the names of Uncle somebody in that. But they had their own little community. They had their own houses that my grandfather and his uncle built for them, and their own church. And they were very well cared for.
Tell me about sort of being a teenager in Eatonton. Where did you go to the local high school?
Yeah. And we walked, well, see, until I got to high school, we walked home to lunch every day. We didn't have a school lunchroom even. But then after I got into high school, they built another building and had a lunchroom. I'd eat lunch there. And the people from the county would come in by bus, and they would always bring their lunch until they built that lunchroom.
What about a national event? Let's move on to sort of World War II. Where were you when Pearl Harbor was bombed?
I can tell you exactly where I was. I had worked in Eatonton for a cousin who was a dentist, and he said you should take training to be a dental hygienist, but I think he said at that time the only place you could get that training was in Memphis, I believe. And he said, I've been called into the Naval Reserve, so I want you to go down to Columbus, Georgia, and work for my friend Dr. Turrington and see how you like it, because I had just started working for him, and see if you think you'd like to be a dental hygienist, and then you can go on to school. Well, I was down there and hadn't been maybe there 6 months in World War II. I was in the boarding house on Sunday afternoon, and we were taking a nap. And the other girl that was with me, and it came on the radio. And right after that, I came to Atlanta.
So was it work that brought you to Atlanta? What brought you to Atlanta then?
Well, I was dying to go in with the Red Cross, so two or three of my friends from Eatonton went with the Red Cross, and some went with the wax and the waves and all this, and I was just dying to do that. So my mother said, oh no, you just can't do that. That's too wild and woolly. Anyway, so I had two cousins who wanted to do the same thing. So my aunt said, well, and I guess, I don't know how I knew about Bell Aircraft, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, my aunt was a widow, and she said, if you girls are just determined to go to Atlanta, I don't want you going up there alone. It's too bad. So she said, I'll rent a house and you all can board with me. So we had a family, someone in our family, I think, had something to do with he was executor, had something to do with the J.M. High estate. And so she leased Mrs. J.M. High's original house at 15th and Lombardy Way. And Miss Petite lived next door, and Miss High had evidently, I guess, built a house around the corner on Peachtree. And so my aunt leased that, and we boarded there.
Right, tell me your aunt's name.
Mrs. Frank Hearn.
Okay.
Aunt Sally Hearn.
Okay.
She's been dead forever.
So what year was it then? Was it
1942.
1942, you came to Atlanta, and you said that there was some other cousins that wanted to come. Who else came with you? Do you remember?
Sarah Hearn and Dottie Hearn. And then there were a couple of other people that lived there, and I guess they were friends of theirs, I don't know. But my aunt had good servants, and they lived in the servants' quarters, which was in back of the high house. And we had maids and butlers and cooks, and it was very nice. So I didn't have to worry about food stamps because I boarded, and we carpooled.
So who had the car?
It must have been, it was not me. None of us had cars. So it was someone that we worked with, and I don't remember.
Okay.
But I know we would drive out Peachtree to, what's that street that's not West Wesley? what's the street that's across from that little shopping center on Peachtree? Not West Wesley. It's before you get to West Wesley.
Peachtree Battle?
Yeah. We'd go down Peachtree from 15th to Peachtree Battle and turn on Peachtree Battle and get on Northside Drive.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't that go straight to Marietta, I
It
think?
does.
Uh-huh. And then, but listen, and when I went out to Marietta to get my job, if any reason our ride didn't come or something, you'd ride the streetcar on Peachtree to 5 Points, and you'd get on the streetcar there. And I think it was a nickel. I'm not sure. I think it was a nickel. And I called the man at the Marietta Museum. This guy, I said, I want to be sure I'm telling this right. And I said, I know that streetcar went to Marietta. And I said, I have friends who said it didn't. He said it came all the way out, went around the square and turned around and went back. I said, well, I didn't think I was crazy. I said, do you think it was a nickel? He said, it probably was. Mm-hmm. Well, all I can remember about it, it went so fast. And it was just shaking like this. And you just knew it was going to run off the track any minute.
So, it was a trolley on a track, is what you...
An old streetcar.
Uh-huh.
Old streetcars, mm-hmm. Like they had on Peachtree Street, too.
All right, well, tell me about working at Bell Aircraft.
Well,
what department were you in?
Design engineering.
And how many people in the department?
You know, I don't know. It was a big area, and it was probably, I'm trying to say 50. I don't remember. It's been so long. Mm-hmm. But the chief engineer was Mr. Brown. He was over the whole thing, and his office was in his private office was part of our area. Mm-hmm. And I was just a flunky. I did filing, and every now and then they'd get something for me to trace or something. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether I gave you George McDuffie's name, but he worked with me. Have you called him?
I wasn't able to get him. He was out.
Well, he said he would love to talk to you.
I'll give him another call.
He's a real nice guy. And I said, George, how did you happen to be working? Were you at Georgia Tech then? He said, no. When the war started, I was at, I don't know what he said, VMI. I don't know where he was at school somewhere. But he came back and worked at Lockheed, apparently. I mean, at Bell Aircraft. But when I read something about the B-29s, did you read my name in the paper?
I hadn't been able to find it.
Anyway, I said, excuse me.
Take another sip of water.
I said, well, I know. Oh, they were talking about the plane that bombed Japan the first time. And I said, so I called the journal on Q&A. I read Q&A. Anyway, I said I worked at Bell Aircraft, and I think that plane may have been built there. And I said, you know the B-29s? No, I didn't know that. He said, I said, well, I'm sure they were. Anyway, he said, can I put this in Q&A? I said, well, that isn't why I called you, but I don't think it matters. Anyway, I called George. I believe before I called the paper, before or after, and I said, George, tell me something. Did we build B-29s at Bell Aircraft? He said, you're damn right we did. What do they want to know about it? He's cute.
Uh-huh. Well, so how long were you at Bell Aircraft?
Till the war ended. Mm-hmm. From 1942 till whenever it ended.
So where were you on VJ Day? So you were still
working.
Still working?
Yeah.
Do you remember anything about that day?
I probably came home and went downtown and celebrated, but I don't remember particularly.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell a difference in the end of the war in the work that you were doing at Bel Air?
Well, I think they closed the place almost. It let a lot of us go as soon as it was over. Mm-hmm. And I went to work for Rich's and worked 43 years in credit and customer service.
Mm-hmm. I want to hear about Rich's, but before we do that, tell me different things about what life was like in Atlanta during the war. You said that there wasn't any rationing because you were in a boarding house.
Well,
So
I
you
mean,
had-
I didn't have to worry about it. I remember that you couldn't get hose, and I had a very good friend who worked in the hosiery department at Rich's who was from Eatonton, and she kept me supplied with hose, but my trouble was finding the money to pay for them, because we got pretty fat, I guess, considering we did pretty well at Bel Air Craft.
Do you remember what you made at Bel Air Craft?
I have no idea. I'm sure it wasn't a lot. George might know. I don't.
Well, did you go downtown shopping when you would go down? To
Ride
go
the
Rich's?
streetcar.
Take the streetcar down. Tell me about maybe going shopping. What was downtown? What was it like?
Well, you'd go to Rich's and Macy's, and you
what
would
would
go.
you do?
I
What
mean,
would you look-
Davis and Paxson.
What would you do downtown? Just give me a...
Well, the main thing, I remember going to the Carnegie Library, which I dearly loved, and it just hurts me to think they tore it down. I went to the Carnegie Library a lot, to Lowe's Grand and to the movies. And I think, I asked some of my friends if they remembered what we paid, and I don't think it was much. But we went to movies at the Roxy and the Paramount. What was the one next to the Paramount? And the Erlanger. And I don't remember going later when I started to work at Rich's. We would walk from Rich's to the Rialto and go to a lot of movies. But I don't remember going there as much when I was working earlier. And I walked around the street. I was Methodist, and my family just thought, you know, you have to go to the Methodist church. But anyway, if I got up in time on Sunday mornings, I'd ride the streetcar and go to hear Paris Harris. Now, I'm not
Which
sure.
Methodist church?
First Methodist
First
downtown.
Methodist? Okay.
They had the best choir, and it was just wonderful. And he had a great sense of humor. And then a lot of Sundays I was too lazy to get up, and I'd walk around the corner to First Presbyterian. Dr. Burns was there. No, Dr. Burns was at Peachtree Christian.
Yeah.
I can't remember who was at First. Seems like it started with an F. Fife. Who was at First Presbyterian back in the 40s?
I wouldn't know the 40s, but I think I might remember a name from the 50s if it was somebody who was still...
You weren't even born.
Not yet. But I do remember Burns over at Peachtree Christian. My grandmother was his secretary for a while.
Oh, really?
In the 60s.
Well, you asked me what I did in Eatonton. We had a lot of relatives here, and we would come from Eatonton, and when we didn't drive with my grandfather, we would ride the train from Eatonton, spend the night in Covington, and come on to Atlanta and visit our relatives. And that's the first church I ever went to in Atlanta was Peachtree Christian, because the people we visited. But I know another thing I'll tell you. My aunt was assistant to the state school superintendent, and she had taught at GSCW and somewhere else, and then she went to Columbia in New York. But she got to be eventually assistant to, and I said, when they'd been writing all this stuff in the paper about Lord and Taylor, and she bought my clothes when I was little. They all came from New York, from Lord and Taylor. Otherwise, I would not. But she always told me, she said, you bought, all your things came from Lord and Taylor.
You had mentioned that when you were younger, growing up in Eatonton, there was a book club, and then you liked to go into the library. What were some of the books that you read? What were your favorite books of the day? Was there...
With the Bobbsey twins and all that, I guess that sounds right, Bobbsey twins. But my grandfather loved music, and they would come to Atlanta to hear opera and to hear Caruso and who was the Irish tenor who was so good he would come?
Caruso is the only name I know.
But there was an Irish tenor who came in. But they would come up here. So I grew up in Eatonton. They had a piano, but they had a big old-fashioned Victrola, and they would play opera music all the time.
Did you go to the opera in Atlanta?
I never went. Oh, I did later. I never went with them. They went before I was born, and they would go to New York. They would ride the train from Eaton. I guess they'd go to Macon and get on the train, or either change trains and go to Savannah. And they'd go ride a boat, ship from Savannah to New York and go to opera.
So there wasn't a train that took you? You had to go, or was it just easier to go?
Now
by
that's
boat?
before I was born.
Uh-huh.
That's my grandparents.
But it never occurred to me that there wasn't a train that would.
Well, they probably, but people used to love to go by boat. Mm-hmm. That was the way to go.
That was the
like when my mother's two sisters married, they all went by boat from Savannah to New York on their honeymoons. Mm-hmm. I asked some of my friends here, I said, was it just people that they said, no, that was the way to go. Mm-hmm. That was what people did. But my grandparents would go. My cousin lives in Athens, and I asked her the other day, I said, I know they used to go to New York and all and go to opera. And she says, well, they'd love to go to Washington, and they'd get a boat from Savannah, and I think she said they'd go to Norfolk and get off and then go into Washington. Mm-hmm. My grandfather was a very interested man. He's totally wonderful.
So after the war, and you have left Bell Aircraft, you went to work at Rich's.
Mm-hmm. I went home and stayed 1 year and then came back to Atlanta and went to work at Rich's.
All right, well, tell me what you did at Rich's.
I was in credit and customer service,
Mm-hmm.
and I love Rich's. I'll tell you something about Rich's. When I started to work there, there was no competition except Macy's. That was Davis and Paxson then. And people remembered, that Rich's had paid the school teachers during the Depression. And I watched that thing on television about Oakland Cemetery, and they said on that program the other night that Rich's and Coca-Cola paid the firemen and the police. I had never heard that, but that was on a program on the PBS, on the history of Oakland Cemetery, and I knew that Rich's did, but when I worked at Rich's, people in Atlanta loved Rich's, and they were so they really did love it, and they were sweet to us, I guess, because they did. Mm-hmm. But the women, I never did go to college because one thing, my daddy was sick a long time, and then the money that my mother had, she invested in Florida. She had a brother who was, do you know anything about the Florida boom, and everybody was investing in Florida land back in the 20s. Mm-hmm. It was before the stock market crash. And she put what money she had, part of what money she had in the Florida land. And then I think what happened, they had a terrible, not a tornado, a hurricane or something down there and just wiped out a lot of things. And that just shot everything to heck. And she lost that. Then what money she had left, she had in the banks. The banks failed during the Depression. Mm-hmm. And my grandfather, by the time that came along, he'd gotten pretty old. And I think, anyway, what was your question? How did I happen to go to?
No, you said that I didn't go to college.
I didn't go to college.
You were talking about why?
Because I didn't have the money. Mm-hmm. I probably could have gotten it, but I didn't. Mm-hmm. If Bell Aircraft and all hadn't come along, I might have.
Because if you hadn't wanted to be in the Red Cross and come to Atlanta,
my friends went overseas with the Red Cross.
Uh-huh.
They didn't stay in Atlanta. Mm. Some of my dearest friends. Mm-hmm. They went overseas with the Red Cross and with the Waves and Wax.
Did you correspond with any of these friends?
Not during that time, no, but we kept in touch until as long as they lived. Well, one's still living.
Mm-hmm. when did you meet your husband?
I've been married twice.
Okay.
I married the first time when I was just 18 years old.
Okay.
And
And what was his name?
Smith.
Okay.
And we were just married a couple of years.
Mm-hmm. And was that before you came to Atlanta?
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I don't know, there was maybe a year. I've forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
I found out he had a gambling problem.
Oh. Okay.
And I really was kind of young when I married. Young, 18 years, when you were 18 years old in 1938 and an 18-year-old now, it's totally different.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway,
Well, then when did you meet Mr. Steele?
all right, my husband,
Uh-huh.
not until 1965. I was not married all of those years, till 1965.
Mm-hmm.
And I met him. His wife had died, and his wife and I had mutual friends. And some of them had a dinner party and invited him, and I happened to be there, and that was that. And then we were married 30 years.
Mm-hmm. So has he passed?
He died 8 years ago,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and he was 25 years older than me. But he could do anything. He absolutely could do anything.
Mm-hmm. What was his first name?
Garland F. Steele.
Mm-hmm.
He built a great big boat in our backyard. That was before I knew him. I have a picture of it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, he was engineer of streets for the city of Atlanta, and he was with the State Highway Department, and he got all the rights of way through North Georgia mountains when the state just first started building roads. And he, then when they started expressways, he worked between the city and the state of Georgia to design the expressways through the city of Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
He was a great man.
Mm-hmm. That's nice. Do you recall any sort of unusual events in Atlanta? Is there any sort of event that you remember?
Well, I was telling my friends, and do you know Dr. Upshaw at Piedmont Hospital? I go to Dr. Upshaw. So I called Laura, his wife, and I said, Laura, I'm going down there. And I said, I want to ask if I'm telling this right. I said, do I remember that when President Roosevelt died at Warm Springs, that Dr. What was his name? Oh, I can't think of his name now. Anyway, he was at Piedmont Hospital, and they called him, and he went to Warm Springs. And Laura said, oh, certainly. She says, Charles is right here. Let me ask him to verify that. And he said, I know she's always told me the story. But anyway, they got the state patrol to take him to Warm Springs. But Dr. Upshaw got on the phone, and he said not only that, but said he treated him here in Atlanta. He had treated him before, and I'll tell you his name in a minute. Ooh. I was telling them about it at lunch before I came over here. It'll come to me. Let's talk about something else, and maybe it'll come to me.
Well, when the train came back through Atlanta carrying Roosevelt's body, did you go down to see the train pass through?
I'm trying to. I don't remember that I did, but I heard all about it. But I don't remember that I did, no.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what effect it had?
Was
sort of on the people?
Just like, oh, you mean about him dying?
Uh-huh.
Oh, people were just horribly shocked, and they loved him. Mm-hmm. Loved him very much. Mm-hmm. But I remember when I was married, I lived in Shadydale, which is just out of Eatonton. And when I was living in Shadydale, he came through. That's the only time I ever saw him. and we stood on the street, and Shadydale's about that big. It's between Madison and Monticello, and he came through in an open touring car, and that was in 1938, I guess. And we all got out on the street, and why he was going that way, I have no idea. But he was going through from Madison to, would he go from Madison to Warm Springs? He wouldn't go that way. Maybe to Macon. I don't know. But he was, and I saw him, and I won't ever forget that.
And you said it was an open touring car?
Oh, yes.
And it was just the one car?
No, there were other cars. There were other cars. Maybe one car, not a big like they have now. Maybe one other car. But he waved his hat now. I always remember that.
Did he stop and talk to
I don't
people,
remember that he
just sort of
did.
go
No,
through
I
it?
think he just drove. I don't remember that he did. But we all stood and waved at him, and he waved back.
Have you met any other presidents or seen any other? I didn't know if living in Atlanta, working at Rich's, if any.
I'm just trying to think if I have. No, I don't. My husband's, one of his sons worked for Richard Nixon. He didn't work for Richard Nixon. He had some connection in politics. I don't remember what it was. We used to go to Washington and visit them.
Are there any other events that you remember that happened in Atlanta?
In Atlanta, I called my friend who's with the History Center, something in Decatur, and I said, hey, did I tell you this story about riding the streetcar to Decatur?
No. Tell us that story.
Well, I said, Harry, I know, and I remember it so well, that people used to just raise sand and fuss and gripe all the time, because if you got on the streetcar to ride to Decatur, you paid a dime. And I said, the way I remember it, if you got on the streetcar in Atlanta and you got to the Decatur city limits, you paid a nickel, and then you had to put in another nickel if you were going on to Decatur. He said, Jane, you got that wrong. He said, someone in my church was with Georgia Power, who owned the streetcars at that time. And he said, I've got it right from him, and he's dead now, but we've got it written down. He said, if you got on the streetcar in Atlanta, you paid a dime to go all the way to Decatur. But if you got on the streetcar in Decatur to come to Atlanta, you just paid a nickel. And I said, all I can remember about it was people just would raise sand about there being a nickel difference.
I guess they...
Isn't that funny? Well, a nickel was a lot of money.
Well, it was. I guess Decatur didn't want people from
But
Atlanta coming
I
over
said,
there.
well, why is that? And he said, and he never did make me understand why, this man, but he said he was a member of his First Methodist Church, and Harry is head of the Decatur Historical Group. And he says, I know it for a fact because he told me, and he explained why or something, but said he had a lot of complaints about it. But I remember people just growling about it.
Tell me something maybe about, I want to go back to sort of this World War II time.
Yeah, I know you do.
What did you wear when you went to work?
Well, I was in like a business office, so I didn't have to wear, I just wore regular clothes.
Well, tell me what regular clothes would be.
Well, you dressed up, you wore stockings and you wore hose, and you didn't wear pants. Women did not wear pants back. Well, maybe those that worked in the plant, they may have worn, they probably did. But when you worked in an office, you did not wear pants. I wasn't allowed to wear pants at Rich's either. But anyway, no, you wore just business clothes.
Can you describe business clothes? I mean, was it a cotton dress? Was it a skirt?
Probably a skirt and a blouse and a jacket or something like that.
And you got the clothes from Rich's?
Most likely.
Because you got your stockings there for sure.
That's right. No, that was, I had two or three friends from Eatonton who worked at Rich's, so that's the only place I ever shopped.
What about shoes?
But you know, one of my friends told me that shoes were rationed. I did not know that. I didn't remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know that?
I had heard that.
She told me yesterday that shoes were rationed, and I did not remember it.
Mm-hmm. So did you have more than one pair of shoes, or
I'm
you
sure
only
I
needed
did.
one?
I'm a shoeaholic, so I'm sure I did.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sure they came from Rich's. But I can't remember except that I just I did not wear pants or anything like that. I wore dresses, probably a skirt and a blouse and a jacket.
Mm-hmm. And did you do your own laundry, or was it done for you, or
That boarding house, it was done
done
for
for
us.
you? Mm-hmm.
I was very lucky.
Describe the house for me, the high house.
You
that
don't
were
remember the
staying in.
house? It was white
Well,
and
I want you to
two-story.
describe it for the tape.
Okay, it was white and two-story, and it had a porch, and it had, I think, kind of square columns. Does that sound right? Do you remember it?
I'm not sure. The one I've seen I thought was darker than that. That may have been on
No, it was
Peachtree.
white. Well, no, it was white. It was on the corner of 15th and Lombardy Way.
Mm-hmm.
And Miss Petite's house was right next door, Miss Ty's daughter, and it was a darker house. But when I lived at this house, it was white. I'm sure of that.
And how many rooms?
Well, had a big living room and a great big dining room and a big kitchen. And I don't know how many bedrooms upstairs. Let's see.
Was your bedroom
Probably
upstairs?
4. Oh, yeah, all the bedrooms were
Did you share a
upstairs.
bedroom?
Yeah. Yeah. Probably 4 bedrooms upstairs, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I shared one with my cousin, and we had, I think, a bathroom that joined.
Mm-hmm. Was there, were there blackout curtains? Was there any?
Well, you know, I remember that there were blackout curtains. I mean, here I remember there was such a thing, but I don't remember that we had them, but I'm sure we must have. Because I have friends, I go to water aerobics every day at Second Pond. You know that. But anyway, I have friends who told me that they were block captains or something, and they had to go and be sure that people, that if the air raid went off or something, they had to be sure the blackout curtains or the lights were turned off. And I'm sure I remember it was there, but I just don't remember too much about it. But I'm sure we followed whatever was being done. But we have girls who were going to Girls High, and they told me that at Girls High they had bicycle brigades where they would ride around and check people on their bicycles in the neighborhood, and that they would, they also had a big first aid class where all the students, Girls High would take first aid classes in case there was an emergency during the war.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's great, but I didn't go to Girls High and didn't know, but they tell me they're real interesting. But several people, like one man, like this man, I just had lunch at Bayuka Baptist with the group, and I wrote down this man's name, and he and his wife have lived here all of their lives, and he told me about things that he did during the war, and I got his name and telephone number.
I'll get that from
You and you called George.
Mm-hmm.
George said he'd love to talk to you, and this guy would too.
That's good. That's good. Before we sort of stop here, can you think of anything else that you think might be of interest? Is there any? Was living in Atlanta? How did that change your life? Did World War II change your life? Was there anything that sort of an influence? And did you realize as you were going through all of those things and working at Bel Air that you were a part of history?
I guess I did. I hadn't looked at it. Yes, I'm sure it did. It sure was different. My life was completely different from living in a little bitty town.
Okay.
Living in the big city of Atlanta, which I dearly love. I'm
Well-
trying to think if there was anything else, and I'm still trying to think of that doctor's name. You want me to call Dr. Upshaw and ask him?
That's all right.
You don't, it'll come to me. You want me to call you back and tell you?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, well, is that everything?
You
we've
want
got?
me to give you these two names, this man's name?
Turn this